goes ever on and on, down from the door where it began. Now far ahead the road has gone, and I must follow if I can.
Hey everybody, it's Brian. I'm back with another video in the Middle-earth Ranger series. Today we're going to be talking about Gear Layer 2. Now, if you've missed my previous Gear Layer videos, just a very brief synopsis. I break my gear into 3 different layers, Layer 1 being what you keep on your body at all times, Layer 2 being what you would add on top of Gear Layer 1 if you're going out for a day trip. This is not intended to allow you to sleep overnight, but you could, if need be. It just would be uncomfortable. And then Layer 3 would be if you are planning to spend 1 or more nights out in the wilderness. Now, each of these kits by themselves would provide you with the survival necessities to stay out overnight, but the more equipment that you add, the easier it is and the less work that takes. Now, I prioritize the equipment in each of my gear layers based on 3 different things. The first is survival necessities, and survival necessities, I use the rule of 3s to dictate those. That being 3 minutes without oxygen, 3 hours exposed to extreme elements, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. Now those are general guidelines. They're not exactly precise. Some environments are going to change those a little bit, but it kind of gives you an idea of what your priorities are. Exposure, water, and food. So those are the survival necessities. The next thing that I look at is the environment that I'm going to be operating in. That's the biome. Am I in the eastern woodlands? Am I in the Pacific Northwest? What's the biome? What's the topography of the area I'm moving through? Is it densely forested? Is it very hilly? Spoiler alert, where I'm at, it's all densely forested and it's all hilly. And then the last thing would be the season. Summer, spring, fall. They all make differences about the equipment that you're carrying. The last thing that I would look at for prioritizing my equipment would be the specific mission. I tend to base my mission objectives on sort of a long-range reconnaissance patrol. That would be sort of a modern military equivalent to what we see Aragorn and the Rangers of the North doing in the Lord of the Rings books. You have a very lightly equipped, very lightly armed force that is self-sustaining and mobile. That was a really, really wordy synopsis. But anyway, let's dive into Gear Layer 2. Now there's one thing that I'm going to get into first, even though it's kind of out of order with the survival priorities, and that is here on the shoulder strap of my haversack. I do have a sheath built into that which holds my old hickory paring knife that I rehandled. This has shown up in other videos before. I carry it there just for convenience. It's very snug fitting. It does not come out. But I carry the extra knife here, and if I am wearing Layer 2, any cutting tasks that I take that require a small knife, I'm going to use this knife for first. That way the knife that's in my Layer 1 kit always stays sharp. Okay, now I'm going to readjust the camera, take the haversack off, and we'll talk through the equipment that I've added in for Layer 2, how that enhances the equipment that I have in Layer 1, and what my reasons and justifications for those are. So this is the main haversack that I use. It is made out of just a cotton canvas drop cloth that I have dyed green. The inside, you can see, is still the plain natural cotton canvas material. I made this a long time ago. I think I made a video about it at the time. It does have a leather shoulder strap that you can see is stitched onto the back. And I currently have this extra belt pouch. This is my old fire kit pouch, and that's just riding on the shoulder strap. Typically I put my wallet in this when I'm at a Renaissance festival or something like that. If I'm going to be out in the forest, I'll put my wallet deeper into my kit just to protect it, and then this will house either additional fire kit, or if I'm collecting tinder, I'll use this kind of as a collection pouch. So just a quick overview of the features of the bag itself. The flap does have 3 pockets in it. There's these 2 small pockets, and then once you unbutton and open this little closure here, there's an additional pocket that runs the entirety of the flap on the back side. And then you have your main pocket here. So let's go through our survival priorities first. We'll talk about those, then we'll talk about some of our mission-specific things as well. And let's start with the first priority, which is exposure. In our Layer 1 kit, we addressed exposure with our clothing and with our fire kit. Now, we have a couple of additional things that we're going to do in this kit. The first is we do have an additional bandana. This is just a 30-inch square of cotton fabric. This is actually from an old bed sheet, and if you notice, it's from the same bed sheet set that I use for my backdrop. So whenever something wears out, you repurpose that fabric and you just keep going with it. The edges are not finished. This is just a rough square of fabric. Obviously, this could be used as a scarf or a head covering during the winter. But additionally, during the summer months, you could soak this with water and put it around your neck or on your head for evaporative cooling. So it really works for both ends of the extremes as far as the environment goes. The next thing that is in the main pouch that helps with exposure is this bag. I call this a browse bag. It's sort of a miniature version of a straw tick mattress. This is just a cotton canvas pillowcase. Basically, it's about the size of a king-size pillowcase. You can see that it does open on one end. It currently is unfinished. I am considering waxing one side of it to waterproof it. But the purpose of this bag, obviously it's a giant bag, so you can use it for anything bags are used for: collecting firewood, collecting wild edibles, carrying things from place to place. But as this is in my Layer 2 and I don't have an additional blanket, if this is a cold weather environment, I need something to insulate me from the ground. So this could be filled with leaves or pine needles or pine boughs or anything like that that would be an insulative material, and it gives me something to sit on. Now, I could lay in this, but bear in mind that the only covering I have is my cape. My cape only comes down a little bit past my knees. So if I'm laying down, my cape's not going to be able to cover my entire body very well. However, and this is something I've done quite a few times, if you have something insulative to sit on, you can sit down, you can cross your legs, you can lean back against a tree, and you can pull that cloak over the top of you, and it will cover, if your legs are crossed and you're sitting, it'll cover just about all of you. And as long as you have something on your head, you can stay quite warm. And then depending on how cold it is, you can do hot rocks and other things underneath. Between where you're sitting, you can dig a hole and put things there. It's a whole thing. We'll talk about that at a future date. So just with the Layer 2 kit, this is something to sit on for insulation. If I add this, well, obviously my Layer 3 kit would be on top of this, so I could stuff this and it actually will cover me from my shoulders to my hips. And then I can use my haversack. I can stuff it and use it as a pillow under my head. That way the only thing on my body that would be in contact with the ground would be my legs. Having a full-size blanket, I can double up the fabric underneath my leg. That would still help me get a good night's sleep from keeping that conductive heat loss from happening between me and the ground. In addition to its insulative value, it is just a piece of canvas. I can put it on the ground to protect me whenever I'm kneeling. I can also use it as a dry surface to process tinder and kindling and things like that. And if I'm working on something, it gives me a smooth and brightly colored surface so that I don't lose any small components that I have in the leaves on the forest floor. The last few things that deal with the exposure side are in the flap. There are some augments to my fire kit. I do have some more of the jute twine tinder twists that were in my main fire kit. I have 6 of these. Again, if you are in a wet condition, then this would allow you to quickly fluff this out and make a tinder to get a fire started with my flint and steel. This is also cordage, right? So I could untwist these and I could use this as cord if I just needed to use it as a lashing of some type. Also, from the fire side of things, I do have my little candle lantern that I made in a video a while ago. It does have 2 candle stubs in here. Obviously, I could use this as a lantern. Let me get it up here. That reflection's awfully bright. So I can use it as a lantern, but Also with a candle, I could use that as a flame extender if I'm in a very wet or very cold condition and I'm having trouble getting ignition on my main fire. Then lighting one of these candles and using that as a flame extension would be very helpful. So the last thing that I have in here for exposure is also a multi-use item, and that is this little river cane vial. It's got a stopper in the end of it, and this is full of salt. Whenever you're out operating, especially here in the south, it's very hot during the summer, and even during the winter it can get quite hot on some days. You're going to be sweating a lot, and no matter how much water you drink, if you're not replenishing the electrolytes in your system, your body ceases to be able to properly function that water and process it into the cells. So having salt is nice. It makes your food taste better, but also having that additional salt in your diet helps to keep you able to hydrate and able to continue to cool your body naturally in that way. It also can be used for wound care in some cases, though I greatly prefer to use honey for wound care as a antibacterial, but salt could be useful for that. There's not a lot in this, so I wouldn't necessarily use it to preserve meat or anything, but anything you can do with salt, you got salt. The next of your survival priorities when it relates to the rule of threes is water. I do have that small tin cup in my Layer 1 kit that you can boil water in, but that doesn't allow you to boil a lot of water. So I do carry in my haversack this little pot. This is just a small, I think it's a 1.5 quart aluminum pot from a 1950s era Boy Scout mess kit. I do carry this inside of a cloth bag to keep it from getting the rest of my bag all sooty and everything on the inside. In addition to this being what I would use to boil water, this is also where I carry my food. Since we are getting into Layer 2, I'm intended to be out for an entire day. I'm going to have some food with me. Now, I'm going to limit that food to things that I could eat without cooking, and it's going to be limited to what will fit inside this pot. Now, currently there is not anything in this pot because I'm not going out in the woods anytime this week, and I don't like to waste food by just leaving it sitting in here. But there's 3 things that I carry. I carry beef jerky, I carry plain oatmeal, and I carry dried fruit, typically dried apples. That gives me a variety of foods that I can eat. All of them can be used to cook, either by themselves or to augment other things. Like you could cook the oatmeal and you could chop up the dried apples and put it in there, and that is very good. You can also cook the beef jerky in a broth if you're adding wild vegetables that you found to make a soup. But all of them can be eaten without having to be cooked. So if you're on the go or you're in a situation where your operational security would not allow you to have a fire, all of those things could be eaten. Even the oatmeal you can just soak in cold water and make a porridge. To go along with the food in the pot, I'd also just have a basic steel spoon. I would like to replace this with a wooden one at some point, but this is what I have now. The last few things are survival tools, but also mission-specific tools. They're kind of a mix. The main large pocket here primarily holds cordage. I have a 25-foot length and 2 6-foot lengths of just a strong hemp twine that could be used for building shelters, building traps, constructing whatever you need to construct out in the forest. Obviously, cordage is something that is very time-consuming to replicate, so having it ready-made is going to save a lot of time, and honestly, that is a lot of what survival is conserving your resources. Just because you can make something doesn't mean that it's the most logical thing to do, so if I can carry something light and simple like this and save myself hours of time preparing and making cordage, that makes a lot of sense from a survival standpoint. It also makes sense from a mission standpoint because now I'm not leaving a lot of debris behind me as I made cordage from scratch from bark. There's also a number of just pieces of leather lace. Anytime I have leather lace left over from a project or I have a leather shoelace that breaks, I'll put the scraps in here. Again, just for general binding up of objects. I also do have a piece of deer antler. This would be used to nap the flint in my fire starting kit, and it's wrapped in a leather lace as well, because if I have it out and I'm using it, a lot of times I'll tie it off to myself so that if I drop it, it doesn't get lost on the forest floor. I also have a set of gloves. I always keep gloves of some type in my kit that's in my layer 2, just to protect my hands while I'm working. Since it is winter, these are actually wool lined. This is just an old set of the U.S. Army issued dress gloves, the wool lined dress gloves. I cut the fingers out a long time ago because these didn't fit me very well. The hand section was great, but the fingers were too short. So I just cut the tips of the fingers out, and now they ride in my level 2 Ranger kit. The last thing that's here in the flap is this spool of snare wire. This is actually the tripwire set from a booby trap simulator that we had in the Army, and I kept one. It's even got the nails that came with it, and it's on an old plastic spool. Eventually I'm going to replace this with a wooden spool, but for now, again, this is what I have. This is just a soft, flexible, but very strong iron wire. Obviously I could use this for snares, traps, things like that if I was going to be out for an extended period of time. Trapping of small animals is definitely going to be the most time efficient way of securing meat in the forest versus trying to get a bow and hunt something larger. But also, if you are operating by yourself in a reconnaissance and patrol sort of situation and you're having to spend the night, operational security is an issue because you're asleep. And depending on where you are, depending on how heavily patrolled the area is with potential enemies, orcs, things like that, you might want to take the time to set up some early warning systems and some snares, tripwires, things like that, so that you have notice before you have company. And then the very last thing in the bag is this leather pouch, a little drawstring pouch that's tied off to the shoulder strap. You could carry odds and ends in this. I keep coins in this. I feel like as a Ranger of the North, you probably would have had a coin pouch on you at all times because you never know when you're going to need to stop into a village and resupply. You would want to resupply from some sort of settlement as much as you could versus taking the time to make your own things while you're out in the forest. Obviously, you would be self-sustaining, but you wouldn't miss that opportunity to save yourself some time just by purchasing whatever it is that you needed. So I carry coins in this. A lot of times if I'm going to the Renaissance Festival, I'll fill this up. And if it's a small purchase, I'll pay for it out of this just because it makes me feel cool. All right, and that is all of layer 2. So we have managed to support our existing layers. We're building on that. Just to kind of touch back on something that I've spoken about a couple of times through this series, a lot of survival equipment is not, we don't carry it because we can't duplicate that. A lot of times there's things that if all you have is a knife, you can go out there and you can build everything that you need. But everything you're having to create from scratch takes time, and everything that takes time takes energy. From a survival standpoint, you want to expend as little energy as possible so that you can make it out the other side. From a tactical standpoint, again, we're looking at the Rangers of the North. They're patrolling, sometimes in hostile areas. The more you're having to build and the more you're having to create, the more sign you're leaving behind you, the more easy it's going to be to track you, the more time you're having to stay in one place, which increases the odds that you're going to be found versus you finding your enemies on your terms. So I hope this has been interesting for you guys. I know this one's a little bit longer than the last one, the layer 2. As we go through the layers, we get more and more equipment. I try to keep it as succinct as possible, but I am a wordy person, so it's a struggle. But thank you guys for watching. Thanks for sticking with me on this, and I look forward to seeing you guys again soon for my next video.